Blair, are you ready to roll? I'll take that as a yes. Welcome, everyone. It's good to see lots of people on here. Should have a really good discussion tonight. I'm Larry Myers. I'm the chairman of the Platform Republicans PAC. We are a Utah Political Action Committee that mostly gets involved in legislative races, and we follow the Utah legislature each year and have a legislative agenda and try to support the Utah Republican platform. And so we will be the hosts tonight. We appreciate those who agreed to participate. We've got a great panel for everyone, and I will introduce each of the panelists in just a moment. We always like to start with recognition of God with a prayer. So I will offer the prayer, and then we will begin officially the program. Our Father in heaven, we are grateful to gather for this Zoom meeting. We're grateful for each person who's involved, for their interest in our state and our government. Grateful to have an interest in correct principles and trying to follow our platform and have responsible taxes here in our state. We pray for our legislators that they may have wisdom and good health and be guided by thy hand. We pray for our voters that we may also have wisdom and be able to share our views and our knowledge and our circumstances with those who represent us, that our system may be successful. We ask for blessings tonight. We may have a peaceful program, and it will be for the benefit and knowledge of all involved. And this we pray now in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Well, again, thanks everyone. Appreciate you joining us. The main topic tonight is property taxes. It's a property tax forum, and we have two great members of our Utah House of Representatives with us, along with our PAC Vice Chair, Bob McEntee. And I'll go ahead and introduce our two representatives first. We welcome Representative Jill Coford. She's smiling here on my left, at least on my screen. And we appreciate Representative Coford being with us. What I've got about her is that she represents District 10, which is in Weber County. And she started her service in the legislature just this year, January of 2025. She is a mother and a small business owner, a graphic design company. Her education is a bachelor's in English, and she's also served on a variety of boards in her community. So we welcome Representative Coford. Our second representative on the panel is Representative Tiara Oxier, and we welcome her from District 4, which has, I think, 5 different rural counties, north and 3. Oh, maybe it's different than what the legislative website says. I pulled the information off the legislative website. And that's in the north and the eastern part of the state. And you are based out of Morgan County, correct? Yes. And Representative Oxier is also a mother, a tax accountant with a degree in accounting. She has also been involved with her local schools, with the youth, and with church service. And so it's fantastic that we have bright and accomplished mothers serving in our legislature and concerned about our tax policy. Our
Thank
third
you.
member, yeah, thanks for being with us. Our third member of the panel and conducting the panel discussion tonight will be Bob McEntee. Bob is an Air Force veteran, currently an Air Force civilian, and he is from Weber County. He is our vice chair of our platform PAC, and he's also a longtime member of the State Central Committee, the Republican State Central Committee. So he's been very involved with our party and trying to push for good policy both on the party and the state level for many years. And so Bob's really been interested in this issue of tax reform and property taxes. I think many of us are concerned about it and the direction it's going. And so we appreciate him bringing this panel together and having this discussion. So with those introductions and those thanks, the way this will go is we will have a panel discussion among the panelists, And then once they've discussed things, we will open it up for question and answer. Once it's question and answer time, I will need you to either use your little emoji to raise your hand so that I can see you at the top of the screen, or to just physically get on and raise your hand. We want to go in an orderly manner of those who have questions and not have everybody talking at once. So with that introduction, Bob, do you want to go ahead and start the panel discussion? Let's get you unmuted there. If we can get Blair to help us out with the muting.
Okay, thank you, Blair. Sorry, I think I was being overly polite by muting myself. Yes. Well, I guess Larry and I and Blair were all in the pack together, and several others here. There's a lot of grassroots activists, and we can tell you there's always that simmering interest in the background about property taxes, right? Especially this time of year when the bill is due. And in fact, I was talking to one of our local, I don't think she joined us yet, but she's a business owner. And she's like, you guys think you got a big property tax bill. Hers was well into the 5 digits, right? Like 30 something $1,000 for her business. Because I've been researching how other states do their property taxes, and I'm really excited about both your bills, Rep. Cofer and Rep. Auxier. I think they're really excellent. I got looking at Florida. I think it's really interesting how they do it down in Florida, where they have, for a homestead, meaning the home you personally own, a 3% cap per year, right? And they've had that in place since 1995, and 3% is the max. It can actually only go up by the CPI, right? So, but if the consumer price inflation by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, if it's higher than 3%, then 3% is the max. So it makes it really predictable for homeowners, right? And it's kind of an advantage for people that have been in their home 20 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever, long term. It's very predictable. And at 3% a year, it would take 24 years for your taxes to double. Here in Utah, taxes are, I've been looking at taxes, they triple in 7 years, right? 7 to 10 years, people's taxes are doubling and tripling. And some people, if you live in certain towns, it might even close to quadruple in 10 years. So I think that has set the background for we could really use some control on top. So with that, and I'll tell you what, I've looked at other bills around the country too. Illinois, a couple of Republicans there, which means it probably won't go anywhere because it's Republicans, and Illinois is very Democratic. But they would like a bill, and you hear a lot of this sentiment out there. What their bill is after you pay your property taxes for 30 years in your county, you're done, right? You graduate from property taxes, which is very interesting, right? I think it sounds appealing. And I'm gonna just head this one off at the pass for you, because if we go to questions, somebody's gonna say, why don't we just get rid of property taxes, right? Which has a nice ring to it. I'll admit that sounds great. But I did a little studying, and I found out that New Zealand did this, right? That for, at least for agricultural property, no property taxes. But so many rich Americans came into New Zealand and bought properties, they totally priced out the locals, right? Because they wanted to build these palaces and have no taxes. And so they had to ban Americans from doing that. There are a few countries, not many that you would want to move to, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and stuff, where they don't charge property taxes, or they do it quite differently. Like some countries will only tax it when you move. But I don't want to over-introduce it. I just want to say there's a lot of different things you can do with property taxes. Rep. Coford's bill proposes to change our exemption. Rep. Auxier's would, what are we ready to go to have them tell us about their bill, Larry? I think they're warmed up. Blair, if you could unmute Rep. Auxier, we'll just have her go first. If anyone was here to hear Representative Lisa Shepard talk about her Secretary of State bill, she had a conflict tonight. She's not able to be with us, but she really wants to have a redo sometime and talk about her Secretary of State bill. So we'll just let Rep. Auxier go, and then Rep. Coford. Please tell us about your bill, Rep.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here today. So I represent 3 counties with redistricting that happened. They haven't taken it off the website, but it's Rich, Summit, and Morgan counties. And I'm a tax accountant by background. And something that comes up with every single constituent I talk to is about property taxes. And there's been so many different ideas. When we talk about tax, just in general, usually when we have an investment, we don't pay capital gains on it until we realize the value. And what seems to be happening to me is we have this asset and we haven't sold it yet. We haven't recognized the value. So why are we being charged the way we are? And so, that's one of the ideas is, should should we be being taxed on the assumed value of our house before we've even realized that gain? Because it could go down, and I don't know if our taxes would really go down, but they should if that was the case. So I've been really trying to think about different ways to do things and address property taxes. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is the Tabor law that they have in Colorado. It's called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and they passed this in the 90s. When Colorado was still red before it turned blue. And something that's really interesting is since the Democrats got in power, they have tried to get rid of Tabor so many times, and the public won't vote for it. And what it is really, really interesting. So many of us feel like we have taxation without representation. We go to truth and taxation meetings and it's just a rubber stamp. It doesn't matter how many public comments it is. If they know that we don't want it, it's a foregone conclusion because they've already accepted their budget and approved it months before they ever hold truth and taxation. And so there's a really short time period for referendum, if there's anything like that people want to kind of fight. And so what Tabor does is every time any taxing entity wants to raise their taxes, it would be either higher than growth and inflation, whichever one is lower. But if they want to do a big increase, like we have seen across the state, they would have to come out and justify to their constituents why they need such a bigger budget than just what the natural growth is with inflation. And I think as we look across the state, we see, especially if you guys are following Tina Cannon, our state auditor, she has been sounding the alarm of how many taxing entities we actually have. And there are so many where we don't even know who they report to. Even if they hold truth and taxation hearings, we don't know who their constituents are. Oh, sorry, my car is just turned off. So we don't know who their constituents are. We don't know who can vote for them. And so this would make it so that they are accountable to the public. They need to justify their budgets, and then it needs to go to a vote. And so it's not just truth and taxation. It would actually have to go on the ballot for people to be able to vote for.
Well, I'm going to break out the pom-poms here and just say I really like that because it puts the shoe on the other foot. Because right now, I think these school districts and commissioners, they just pop their Xanax or whatever self-soothing they do, and they listen to all your input, and then they just vote how they're going to vote anyway. Usually, once in a while, they'll make a little change, right? Little, for all of what they heard. But usually, they just are going to raise your taxes, and they can. We've given them that right. Truth and taxation hearings are good, but they don't really change things that much. So I think this is how it should be, right? The Ron Swanson School of Government here, that the government should justify to us why do we need to tax your home more, which you're right is an unrealized gain, right? We don't know if it would really net that, and they do vary. I have seen my property taxes go down a couple times, right? I've lived long enough to see them usually go up but go down, and mine went up around 200% in the last 10 years. I looked at a lot of homes in my area, and everything from doubling to tripling to 346, 396% if you were unlucky enough to buy in parts of Ogden in 10 years, right? We're not talking lifetime, 10 years. Like I said, when you do the math on Florida, at 3% a year max, it would still take 24 years to double if that was at the max every year. And at least that makes it predictable. So I like your thing. I like the Taxpayer Bill of Rights you mentioned. Have you run into some support? Are any other legislators friendly toward you?
Yeah, there are a lot of legislators who are friendly. I think we all know that people who control the budget don't want their budget being controlled. And so that's where some of the opposition is. And I would say there's a large contingent in the House, especially, who like this idea and think that government needs to be controlled. We are the highest taxed Republican state in the country. We've grown our budget by double at the state level in less than 10 years. Spending is out of control, and we need to do something about it. And I think that there are a lot of us who want it. The question is it, getting the support heard at the highest levels and letting them know that this is something that the public wants. I think if this was on the ballot, it would pass in a second. And so that should be, why not have us just be responsible and pass it as the state legislature?
Rep Oxier, there's some comments coming up here that reminded me. Is like Stuart Campbell, he's from my county. He mentions that we can't do referendums on school districts. I didn't know that. But it made me think, and this other lady, Karen Spencer, mentioned that we shouldn't be taxed by any entity that is not elected. And when she said that, that reminded me of PIDS, the public.
That's right.
Structure. So I forget what the D stands for, department maybe. Would your bill apply to PIDS too?
Every single taxing district. And this is one of the big reasons why I want it that way, because it is for everything. It's not just for school districts. It's not just for, mosquito abatement, but we are taxed in so many different ways that we need to get a handle on all of them. And, there is some talk about, oh, let's just put it on the school districts because that happens to be a big thing in the media right now. But if we only tax the school districts, or we only tax or put this on the cities, that leaves the state open to becoming such a huge force of power against local control. And I think it just makes us so much more open to the government overreach that I think most of us as Republicans don't like.
Now, Rep Boxier, I'm looking at the comments again. I know you're in your car. You might be a little limited. I'm going to quote former Speaker Greg Hughes. I heard him on the radio the other day. He really simplified it. He explained how your local county property taxes that go to the school district, which I think is the majority of the taxes you pay are going to the school district. He said that goes to fund like building. And the state, the income tax we pay, that goes to fund, I'm going to call it like operations, right? The continuing paying the teachers, the school budget, whereas the county has to pay for the buildings. And we have some very nice buildings, by the way, some real beauties. But maybe you could just cover what do your local property taxes go towards?
Yeah, so most of them are to the schools. I would say that it's more than just buildings. When they want to build a building, most of the time they have to bond for that separately. So there's a huge portion of that property taxes that go towards paying for teachers and just the running of the schools. Now, about 5 years ago, the state decided at the legislative level to freeze the property tax rate. And when that happened, usually what would happen is if our property values raised in valuation, the school district still only had to have a certain amount to meet their budget. And so the property tax rate would go down. But when they froze that rate 5 years ago, you all know what happened with our property tax valuations. They have gone like this. And we should have seen that tax rate go down. But instead, with it staying up, it's captured all of that value. And so every year when our valuations went up, that was the new baseline for the budgets for the next year. And so this is how we have dumped over $9 billion, I think, go into the school from this thing happening. I think that is also with the state thing. I think it was 1.9 billion that was raised just from this tax rate freeze at the local level. So that's a huge reason why our taxes have gone up. But it pays for all sorts of things. And then on top of that, with income tax, we do put in a very large portion as well. And that helps pay for all of the extra things. I mean, we pay for fees, we pay for software, we pay for aids, we pay, like the special education budget. All of it goes together in something called the weighted pupil unit. And so the local taxes are part of that. But then the rest of the pie is also income tax as well. And so we pay about $9,500 per kid in our schools. And so that is with the income piece and also with the property tax portion that's going into it.
Okay, thank you. And people, I know in our county, you can go to the county website and it'll break down exactly where your taxes are going. So much to the fire district, so much to the city. Not my city, because they don't charge property taxes, which is great. But I don't want to name it because I don't want everybody moving here, right? I'm just joking. But there's 2 cities in Utah that don't charge property tax that I know of. But school is usually the majority. I just kind of wanted to cover that because I'm sure when people watch this without being able to ask a question that might come up. And we know that our state income taxes mostly go to pay for the schools. Larry, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I'd like to flip over to Jill for a minute because she's been very patient, and we'll come back to you, Rep. Oxier, when we'll just go back and forth here a little bit, and then we'll do the Q&A whenever Larry thinks it's time for Q&A. So Rep. Coford, I think we've got the gist of Rep. Oxier's bill. And I don't see your 2 bills as being mutually exclusive. In fact, in my fantasy world, they would both pass, right? But why don't you tell us about your bill and how it's different?
Well, first, thank you. Thank you, Larry and Bob and everybody for having us here. It's a pleasure to be here. And I appreciated your prayer. We all need those extra prayers for all of us in public service. So thank you for remembering us. And I agree, Bob. I don't think that our bills are in conflict at all. I think they're very complementary. I'm grateful that Rep. Oxier is looking at the Tabor bill. It's a heavy lift. And it's a heavy lift because of our local municipalities and our local taxing districts. And let's just cut right to the chase. There's very little from a state perspective that we have to do with local property taxes. It is driven by the budgets of our local taxing entities. It's our schools, it's our counties, it's our mosquito abatement. You probably have 15 different taxing entities on that tax statement. And if yours came like mine did the last couple of weeks, you're just as upset and sad and frustrated as I am. It's the number one thing that I hear about. Representing a large portion of Ogden City, I have young families and seniors who, we all know the problem. They're being priced out of their homes. The way the system is supposed to work is that when your value goes up, the rate is supposed to float down so that your tax stays revenue neutral. But what we've seen is an increase over time of truth in taxation and of increases in budgets, which then increases the rate. Every time somebody holds truth in taxation, it's to increase the rate so they can increase their budget. In theory, they're doing what Tiara's bill in part would do and telling the voters why they need more money. In practicality, many of us, when we go to those truth and taxation meetings, feel completely unheard, and there feels like there's a lot of finger pointing. So when we had the perfect storm happen in 2018 when the rate was frozen, 2020, 2019, 2020, property values, homeowner values went through the roof. Home values went crazy because of COVID. And we had a lot of people moving in. And when that whole perfect storm happened, we had a shift in the burden. So, and the reason I started with the whole revenue neutrality issue with property taxes is because in theory, those revenues only raise when we raise the rate through truth and taxation. So if values go up and that baseline budget remains the same, there's a shift in the buckets of where the taxes are coming from because they're intrinsically tied. So if home values go up and business values go down, which happened in COVID, then the burden of that total bucket of taxes that has to be collected is being collected by the homeowners and not necessarily businesses. It's being shifted from centrally assessed from businesses, from other properties whose values are going down to our primary residents. So there's been a lot of talk over the last 2 or 3 years about how do we rebalance these buckets. Historically, for primary residents, we have carried between 40 and 45% of that budget. Now we're carrying more like 50 to 55% of the budget. There are 3 ways that we can balance these 2 buckets because they're tied together, and they're tied together constitutionally, right? Blair, we do tax vacation rentals. They're hard to find, but most of them get hit at 100% taxation because they're not a primary residence. So that is being looked at in many of our counties. Sorry, I just saw that come up in the chat. So that is happening. And what will happen if we pass the bill that I would like to pass, and then it goes to the vote of the people, is we would raise the residential exemption from 45% to 55%. That's really the cleanest way to rebalance these buckets. There will be a nominal shift from homeowners to businesses, but the biggest shift will be to our non-primary residents and some of our other properties. It's also a heavy lift. And we want to make sure that we're getting the policy right, that we're not penalizing business, and yet businesses are getting a lot of really great tax breaks. So when this is the issue that I hear over and over and over from constituents, and it feels really like one of the most egregious taxes on the planet, because do we have private property rights or not? Are we under threat of losing our homes if we don't pay this bill? It sure feels that way. So when it feels like such an egregious tax, I think this is one step in that quiver that we can use to try to balance it. I will say, Bob, that at a conference this summer, there was a bill much like the Florida cap, the 3% cap, that was passed as, I believe it got passed as some model legislation. Kay Christopherson was the sponsor of that at our conference. I'm hoping that Kay is running that again because that was his language and his legislation. I've talked to him a little bit. I'm hoping that we might see something like that. So really that's the essence of my bill. I'm happy to answer more questions. I was in a meeting today with Tina Cannon, and I just wanted to talk about that a little bit because Tiara had brought that up. Many of us have had multiple conversations with her office. She's doing really, really great work for us. They've done a complete rebrand of the transparentutah.gov. If you've not been there, go there. We need your eyes on that website. The data is there. It's sometimes hard to find, but they are working really hard to make it more accessible. That is the mechanism that we have in place currently to hold our local taxing entities accountable. There are some gaps, and I'm actually going to have a follow-up meeting this next week with Tina's office to probably get some more legislation in place to help rein in some of our taxing districts, just to put some guardrails in so that that transparency and that accountability is there. The last thing I think any of us want is taxation without representation. That's fundamentally wrong. So we're working really hard with our auditor who is watching these budgets, who's trying to make the data more accessible. And we're trying to move the needle on transparency because it's so vitally important. That's how we hold government accountable. I think all of you probably watched the story that broke about the county, Salt Lake County Council, and they're wanting to raise, and their 3 deputy mayors. That hit nationwide press, that they have 3 deputy mayors that are getting paid how much money? And that those are the kinds of things that if we can get that data in the hands of people that we can find, we can hold our local entities accountable.
Well, you don't want an even number of deputy mayors, right? It's hard to make decisions. I would like to ask a clarifying question of our 2 reps here, because just so everybody knows, I believe Rep Oxier told me that you're going to do a bill version, but you might also put forward a constitutional amendment. Is that right? And Rep Kofer, does yours require a constitutional amendment, or is it just a bill?
So mine are 2 bills because it requires 2 bills. It requires the constitutional amendment, and then it requires a statutory change. And so we have to have both in order to get it on the ballot for next year, in order for the people to be able to vote on it. but we can't, but it's tied both to the Constitution. The 45% is in the Constitution, and then there's statutory language that backs that up. So yes, mine does require the two bills.
Thanks.
Um,
Yeah, so I have the two bills as well. And so that's just a procedural thing, that if the legislation passed, then it also has to go to the public to then vote on it as well.
So I wanted to just, there's a couple of questions. Bob, do you want me to, I see that they're related to some of the bill text.
You can answer those, and I would like to understand those. So if you've got, is it possible you could have a bill that passes, but your constitutional amendment doesn't get is it 2/3 required?
The constitutional amendment does need 2/3. What would happen is if we don't get the support on the constitutional amendment because that percentage is in the Constitution, then it won't get passed. So,
Okay.
and I do believe that I have the support in the House. It's going to be the Senate where I think it's going to be a little more challenging. So we're working on that. Just a couple of questions. In terms of renters and occupancy, I don't believe that is the metric of how a primary residence is determined. There are rental properties throughout the counties, like big apartment complexes, that do get the primary residential exemption. And
Houses do too. So anyone who lives in a house, even if they don't own it over 6 months, they get the primary exemption for that. So if I owned it, it's true, because I have a bill on this to actually change the definition of what the residence is. But I've talked to the tax commission about this. And so if I own a home and I'm renting it out to someone, as long as they are a long-term rental past the 6 months, they would then qualify for that primary exemption. So basically my investment is getting subsidized because of that. And the justification for it is that we want to encourage long-term rentals rather than short-term rentals. But I think we do need to talk about what exactly a primary residence is.
Sorry, Tiara, I didn't mean to say no to that. I was
okay.
A comment and I apologize. And I didn't realize that was based on domicile, and it could very well be based on the domicile. We opened a committee bill file in Rev and Tax this last interim meeting to look at just that. So there is a committee bill file opened to look at taxing non-residents, and this is an interesting conversation. Think of Summit County, and I know, Tiara, you have part of Summit County in your district, where you have people that live there very short amount of time, and a lot of them are from back east. And I know I've talked to friends who live in Park City and friends who are from back east, and they're like, "Your property taxes are cheap. I'd pay triple that." And so there we are looking at, well, if you think our property taxes are so cheap and you're willing to pay triple, maybe we'll let you if you're not a full-time resident of the state of Utah. So that is a committee bill file that was opened in Rev and Tax this last interim meeting. But it does get a little bit challenging when you have renters and rental properties, and a lot of those costs are being passed through. So it's a good conversation, I think, to have.
So a lot of people with us tonight are in the know, right? They know how these things work, but some people watching the video later may not know. So, although I do have a question. So your bills, you would offer them in the legislature. They would first go to Rules Committee, where they have to come out of Rules Committee, right? Or they don't go anywhere else. I don't think that Rules Committee has a public hearing. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. So we can't really go and support you in that way as citizens, but we can email the people on Rules Committee. Like I know Jordan Tusher, I believe he's the chair. So that would be one way to support these bills. Hey, we want to see Rep. Oxier's bill get voted on in committee, right? And Rep. Cofer's bill. We want to see these things move forward. And let them know you're watching. That's how you can help when it's in rules. Then it's going to go to committee. When it goes to committee, people can come down to the Capitol and give testimony. Like for example, I could tell you I've been a real estate investor, but I've never bought an investment property in Utah because the taxes are kind of high, right? Because you get hit with that full value property tax, and in over in Wyoming, the property taxes are kind of adorable, right? I mean, it was like $500 for a little townhouse, $800 for something on 3/4 of an acre, right? Idaho, I had to pay the full taxes too, but again, much more moderate. Even though, yes, a lot of East Coast people, they pay ridiculous amounts of taxes. In Florida, where they finally got a handle on it, where they made a constitutional change in 1995, their property taxes are probably double what we have. We do have comparatively low, but I think it's good to get ahead of it before people are losing their homes, right? We don't want to see that going on, and I know that's a popular sentiment. But when it comes to committee, people can either go down to the Capitol and testify, or even just be there, right, and show support. The other way, they can join via Zoom, right, where it might be a little harder sometimes to get called on, but if they can't make it to the Capitol that day, they can support your bill in committee by zooming in. Do I have this right? Is there anything else they can do?
Yeah, actually, one other thing that's really beneficial is not only showing up to committee, but looking at the representatives or the senators who are on those committees and emailing them and calling them ahead of time saying, hey, I know that this is going to be heard, or I want this to be heard. This is where I stand on it. I really want you to support it, because to be honest, a lot of times in committee, we have already talked to all of the committee members, and they kind of know how they're going to vote. And so if we can influence them before the committee even happens and talk to them and put pressure, that's a huge thing if they're feeling that beforehand.
Okay. Well, Larry, is it time to go to a Q&A for the audience? I believe it is. I know we've got some things, and Rep. Cofer took a couple from the chat here, but I think and Blair, if you're ready to unmute people when they want to ask a question, I think it's time to open it up to questions, and just let us know which rep, or if you want to go to both, and see your hands go up if you have a question. Okay, thank you, Blair. I see Christine Brown there. She's got a question. Can you unmute Christine, Blair? I had a deaf girlfriend that could lip read, but I never picked it up.
I just want to say both sound great, and I thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. I see a question by Marianne in the chat about not seeing the text for these bills yet. Our bills don't have to be public yet, and a lot of times that they're not until they're going to be heard or right before the session starts. There's a time when they'll all go public. So I have a lot of mine drafted, but it's not 100% yet, and so that's why it's not public yet. I don't know about Representative Cofert's.
Name. I do have these drafted. They're just not public yet, Marianne. And as far as the Rev and Tax Committee bill, because that was just open, the file was just opened last week, there's no language on that. So, yes and no, Marianne, on my bill, waiting for it. And there's some strategy involved in that, because there are some big lobbyists that are going to fight the property tax raising the exemption. And so we've been trying to be very strategic about when we release that. Like, how big of a fight do we want now? Do we want to start it now, or are we just going to fight it out and duke it out in the 45-day session? So they know it's coming. I've been pretty transparent. I had this bill file open last year. I had some businesses that were really upset about it, and I said, bring me an option. Show me what the other options are. And they didn't. So we're back.
The host asked me to unmute, and I have grandkids living with me temporarily, and they were being pretty noisy, so I chose not to unmute, but I hope they've gone.
Can I go next?
Sounds like it.
I'm unmuted, so I'm going to go. So, I spoke to Kim Coleman recently in the last several months, a former Utah legislator, and she said that she was involved in a lawsuit against her school district down in southern Salt Lake County, somewhere, I want to say South Jordan area, about how the school districts are not, they're the only taxing entity in Utah that does not allow a referendum to happen. And I think she said that it went all the way up to the Utah Supreme Court. I haven't found the case yet, and I asked her to send it to me, and she still didn't send it back. And so I know she was a little bit busy, but that concerns me that I love that power gets pushed down to the local level. And I know some of these taxing entities, we all have concerns with them, but certainly a school board, it's 52% of my property tax bill this year. So it's always more than the majority. And what you've all proposed thus far is awesome. I think it's very ambitious, and I'm not going to hold my breath on the Senate. The House has got it. The Senate is where everything always, always, always stops in Utah. And I think I think it's ambitious. I'd love to see us just tackle the biggest portion of our tax bill and see if we can get any traction as individual Utahns and individual taxing entities, specifically the school districts, to say, let's try and hold those people accountable. I feel like the legislature did a good job at forcing the districts to that's why they all went to truth to taxation this year, was forcing them to adjust or modify their tax levy rates, and they pushed that power down, which is good. But just like Jill said earlier, they were deaf. They didn't listen to us. They had already decided what they were going to do, and it just feels hollow. And we've got to be able to do a referendum on these school districts. Has anybody talked about doing that? Because I know there was a bill that went through last year or earlier this year that was going to go through to change this so that school districts could. But because of all the other things going on, the other school bills, I think from what people told me, they didn't want to come across as so like we were hating on education, which is not the case. But I think they finally just said we have to put that one aside. Has there been any talk, either representatives of addressing the school district referendum issue?
Honestly, this is the first I've heard about it. I was just talking to someone today, and we were talking about moving the dates to expand so that you could have a full referendum time. So I'm going to have to look into this. I do know that when school districts want to bond, that has to go to the ballot of the people, and so they have a voice then. But I haven't heard that you can't referendum.
Yeah,
So
Kim Coleman was the one that told me. So
I'll talk to her.
yeah,
Absolutely.
that lady knows so much.
No, you're correct, Stu. You can't referendum the school district. I can't remember who had the bill file open last session. I've heard rumblings of that coming back, but again, everyone keeps their cards pretty close to their chest unless they're presenting in an interim committee, and I haven't seen that come back yet this year. I wouldn't be surprised to see it come back. So we'll do some digging and see if we can let you know.
I'd like to offer comment to Stu here, who I know he's in my ledge district. I'll tell you what, I've done a referendum, and I've done a successful one. And while that's kind of fun to do, right, but it's a lot of work. And if there's any way I could be spared a referendum, like one or both of these bills passing, I would so much rather just show up at a hearing and email my senators and reps to encourage support for this. But a referendum it's a big pain right now. On the other hand, I will say this is an initiative. People have approached me because they knew I was in a referendum and I advised people on an initiative. People have been approached me about doing an initiative to cap our property taxes, right? And that's why I was looking at the Florida model. And I can tell you, in my estimation, people would trip over each other to sign a referendum to cap our taxes, right? But it's much better to have our representative government do that. So I'm glad to see these two reps that have the energy and the will to do it. Because when you do you talk to an older rep that's been around a while, and you talk to them about a constitutional amendment, they might faint, right? Because they know it's a lot of work and it's a heavy lift. And do you know what you're asking? Well, yes, I do, right? But I'm really glad to see these two taking it on because the people are behind them. And Rep. Auxier is right. If this goes on the ballot, it passes, right? But yeah, referendums, oh my gosh, it's great to have them. But boy, I don't want to do that unless we have to. But I don't mind. I don't mind letting people know that I think there is a chance that an initiative could break out if we don't see some sort of reform. And Blair, I see you've got Bert Harvey unmuted, so I'll just yield to Bert.
Thanks. My question is really for Representative Telford. And in talking about your bill, and I asked this question in the chat, and I think the idea of adjusting the primary residence exemption is an interesting one, but it does require a constitutional amendment. I'm wondering why go that direction versus doing something to change the rate, how taxes are calculated, because those of us in the know, all the value gets rolled up into a single ball, and that's where we get the disparity between residential and commercial and other types. Why not split that rate and have residential be calculated as its own, commercial be calculated as its own, the other one be calculated as its own? I think it's probably a heavy lift either way with the business community, but that's just wonder if there's other ideas that have been floated around without having to amend our constitution.
We've looked at that, Bert, and it's a great question. That actually also requires a constitutional amendment because
of course it does.
Because in the Constitution it says that the taxes are and you'll have to forgive me, I'll get the exact wording wrong, but basically we have to apply the taxes equally.
I see.
So it has to be spread equally. So even though the values are what makes that teeter-totter fluctuate in the buckets, right? If you think about it that way, that's what makes the imbalance happen is the values, the relative values when commercial went down in 2020 and we had primary residential skyrocketing. That's what created the imbalance. So we've looked at that. I mean, this isn't a new bill for me. I had it open last year. I worked really hard on it last year. I was really gung-ho to send it last year, but I backed off for our business community and said, look, I'm willing to look at getting to another policy, but you've got to bring something to me because the way I see it, there are 3 ways to do this, and this is the least egregious and the most straightforward, and I will wear a cape with the people. So bring me something different, and they haven't. And that's just the reality. So yeah, we've looked at that. I wish we could do that. We thought about it, but that's also and that gets really kind of crazy. And I don't want to open that up statutorily. In Utah, we kind of like the flat tax and the way that we share that equally.
Well, that makes sense. I've just been wondering about the thinking behind that process. I'm glad to see that there's some deep thinking there, which sometimes some bills in the legislature don't have any deep thinking. Thank you for doing that work.
Trying really hard to to get this one right. So I've done about 52 different circles.
Thank you.
You know, we've got a comment in the chat here from Representative Katie Hall, who's also from Weber. In fact, maybe she's Weber Davis. And she's saying, I think she's referencing the Representative Christopherson that he might have a bit. You know how when you give your husband more than 2 things, you got to make him a list? So I remember your 2 bills. But now, what was Christopherson's bill going to do? Because I lost that one.
Christopherson's bill was the cap, I believe, was it like the 3% tied to CPI cap. I think what Katie was referencing was Rex Schiff had the referendum on education bill.
Yeah, he had that one. It passed the House 40-33 and then failed in Senate committee 4-3. And it looks like McKell was the Republican that voted against it.
Yeah, no, I didn't know about that one. We try to give you representatives input when we know of something, but I'll tell you what, if you need some troops, right, let the Platform Republican PAC know, because we're all about lower taxes, right, and higher freedom. So I would have been happy to turn out for that Senate committee vote and talk to people or stare at them or email. I didn't know about Christopherson's bill. Maybe that's my bad, but there's a lot of bills happening. That's a good one too. So I like all these bills. Thank you. Rep Hall, did you have any other inputs there?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you. So we had one Republican defect on that bill. I'm sure he had great reasons. And I believe that Senator McKay said that the votes put to the voters for property taxes, when they went to a vote this year, they passed. So I'm not sure which ones have to go to a vote. Maybe he could tell us. I'm used to the truth in taxation where people say whatever and then the board just does what it was going to do.
It's the ones that go on the ballot, like the ZAP tax or the
And the
RAP
ramp.
tax, the extra things that aren't put on by the cities or the school districts. These are
Okay.
extra ones that the community can decide to do.
So like for trails, that sort of thing.
Ramp tax, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Okay, thank you, Senator McKay, for those inputs.
But I think that also is great, because that means that, you know, the ramp tax, they love the arts. They want to support those things, and they are happy to have a tax because it has been justified to them what it is. When we have taxing authorities just raising taxes and we don't know why, or we see salaries of administration throughout the school districts that are, you know, $400,000 for some administration, that's hard to justify to the voters. And so I think, you know, I think most voters are pretty reasonable, and I don't think that we would vote down every single new tax, but it has to make sense.
Well, maybe you've got our audience dry. I kind of had one more question I'm trying to formulate on. So help me get this. So let's say we have some more inflation come at us. Nobody raises our taxes. Let's just say, right, no truth in taxation, none of that. But if our home values go up, will our taxes continue to go up, or theoretically would they just kind of be neutral?
They should go down if our values are going up, because the budgets have to stay the same. It was only during the rate freeze that they kept going up and up and up, because the rate was not allowed to float down. But when it floats down, they're still collecting the same amount of revenue for their budget that they had planned.
Okay. That's good to hear. But you know what gets me is you always see new construction. I've seen a lot of new construction, right? High rises, single family homes, townhouses, and businesses. But it doesn't seem like, for some reason, the bigger tax base never seems to like push the taxes down, right? They say it's revenue neutral. Is there a comment on that?
Yeah, actually, so that was that other bill that I was talking to you about how the tax rate is actually calculated. Right now, when they try to find out what rate to tax everyone by, they take all of the existing properties and find out that valuation and divide it by how much they need for their budget, and that lets you know what the tax rate is going to be. But that's only all of your existing properties. So if you're in a high growth area where you are getting tons and tons of building and development and growth, they tax all of those new properties at that same rate. And so all of that new money that they're getting is not calculated into making up the budget the way they needed. It's added on top as just like surplus and bonus money. And that is the new cap for the next year. That's the baseline budget for the next year. And so there's no sort of I can't think of the word, but economies of scale happening here. Like we have impact fees, we have all these things going on, and yet we're getting all of this money that's just extra that wasn't planned in the budget. And then they're just capturing all of it and saying, oh, well, okay, this is our new budget next year. It's not like, oh, maybe we should go down to this budget, or maybe we didn't need all of it to fund all of the infrastructure or all of the different services. Because when you already have a lot of those services in a city or in a county, not every single new development has the same amount of cost to it. And so that's one of the other bills that I am wanting to look at, is how that's calculated and putting the growth back underneath the rest of that calculation instead of letting it be outside.
Okay, well, thank you.
One more thing I could say about taxes going up. So every time the legislature increases the WPU, which is that weighted pupil unit, like this year, the schools got 4% added on top of it. When that happens, that does actually force all of the taxing districts to have to increase their rates. And so every time the schools are asking for more money, that's what's happening. When we raise, okay, we're saying you can raise your budget by this much more, and so that means you can taxed so much more, and then we are putting more in through income tax as well. So that would be one thing that, and interestingly enough, that does not go through the truth and taxation. That is just a legislative thing that gets to happen. And I ran a bill last year to take off. There was another thing like that where every time we raised this WPU, it actually raised automatically the rates. And it had gone to $200 million in just 7 years. And it was cumulative, adding every single year at least $30 million with no end in sight and not going through truth and taxation. And so luckily I was able to get that taken off. And so that's no longer going to be able to be done through the legislature.
Thank you. And Blair, we've got a request from Ron. I don't know which Ron it is, but he would like to be unmuted, please.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Ron Mortensen. I put in the chat, I don't know if it came through. Out here in our talking about the new growth, we have a recreation district out here, and from 2004 until 2024, they did not raise the tax rate at all. And I asked them, and they came in and said, well, we got to catch up on inflation. So I asked them if they'd show me the revenue that they received in 2004 and the revenue they got in 2024. And because of new growth, their revenue had actually increased over the years faster than inflation. So without any new increases to cover the cost of inflation or anything, the revenue outran inflation just because of new growth. And that's, if we'd ask every school district, ask every county, ask everything to give us the revenue increases, you could see what percentage it actually went up, because they just come in and say inflation's gone up and we didn't raise it, so we lost all that. But they didn't, because they're going faster than inflation thanks to new growth. Over.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. Senator John Johnson on his website, Politicket, he's got a good article about how Utah school districts, their budgets have far outpaced enrollment, right? Like if he's got an excellent graph where it just shows spending just keeps going up like a roller coaster going up, and yet enrollment has rolled over. It's starting to go down, but that hasn't affected spending at all, which is an amazing fact when you'd think they would curve together, but they don't. So there is some profit. I won't say which contractor, but it was reported to me that a contractor bragged how on every school they make $1 million profit when they put the HVAC in. Well, we want them to make profit. I don't know if that's obscene or not, but they sure seem very happy about the profit they could make off new schools. And I think that's something we need to look at locally. Yeah, Blair's put a Taj Mahal type building in there. I think
Absolutely.
these buildings have an effect.
Yeah, it's something else that we talked about in Education Appropriations Committee. I think it was appropriations, is that architects get paid for a percentage of the cost of a school. So they're incentivized to do these outlandish, they're awesome. Like you said, they're beautiful, but this is what college buildings used to look like. This is not necessary for
Right.
teaching our kids. And I'm not advocating for communist block houses or something like that, or buildings. But especially with our school safety issues, if we have a whole glass front of our school, like what are we doing? And so that's definitely something that we're looking at too, is looking at the costs of how these actually go through being approved. And in fact, we found out that the legislature had passed previous laws taking the inspection of these schools away from the state inspection and having them do it themselves. And so we're trying to figure out a way to put that back in through the same process that the rest of the state buildings have to go through to try to get a handle on these.
As a follow-up on that, I know that there was some conversation about what Representative Sawyer was looking at some of the costs of per square foot of the buildings. I've been working a little bit with Walt Brooks. He's from Washington County. He's been doing a deep dive on DFCM and our processes there. And somebody had mentioned something about the closed system that doesn't allow for enough competition, in my opinion, in our building process. And to Tiara's point, K-12 is outside of the state process and outside of DFCM, so it gets really challenging because you have business administrators who are now all of a sudden contract management specialists when they're not, and so that leads them to sometimes say, well, this is everything we want, and we have architects and contractors who are incentivized then to spend it all. So yeah, there has been a lot of work happening over interim on DFCM and their processes, and we are looking at an entire shakedown kind of that area and what they're doing and trying to find some efficiencies there and more competition so that we can drive the prices down.
That's good to hear, Rep. Clifford. I was looking at Blair Brandenburg. He's our Zoom host tonight, by the way, and PAC member. Thank you, Blair. That our schools, the new middle schools, are over $400 a square foot. And when you compare it, it's more than what they spend in New York City back when they weren't communist, and Seattle and other places. Now, if it was for earthquake proofing, I could understand it might cost more here, although Seattle has earthquake concerns. But I think, yeah, they just ratcheted upward. And Rep. Oxier, I think I'd heard that, and I'd forgotten. It's kind of like the waiter, right? The waiter always wants you to sell you dinner or an extra drink or something to take home because they get a percentage, right? They're going to get tipped. Well, we don't want the wrong incentive for. In fact, I was thinking, what if school districts what if the members could get a bonus for finding cost reductions, right? That might kind of turn the tables the other way. Anyway, just a thought.
So one thing just to bear in mind, Bob, that because it is an outlandish dollar per foot when you look at it, but that also includes all the furnishings and desks. It goes beyond just what, at least in my experience in working with some small business owners who are in the construction management world, I think of cost per square foot of a new home, and it doesn't include often the fridge and the washer and dryer and all of the furnishings. And so when we're doing schools, it does include all of that. Should it be $1,000 a square foot? Absolutely not. Can we drive those costs down? 100%. We should be driving those costs down. But just be aware that sometimes we have to make sure we're comparing apples and apples.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate Rep. Katie Hall, Senator McKay, Rep. Oxier, Rep. Coford for being on the Zoom with us. Larry, thank you for sharing, and maybe you're going to say a word about our PAC and our website. And Blair, thank you for hosting. I really appreciate everybody that turned out tonight to kind of make this more interesting with your questions and comments, including Bill Olson with an O. So Larry, once you're unmuted, I'll just hand it over to you to conclude us. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, I made the mistake of muting myself, and Blair's got tight control. We appreciate that, Blair. Great job today hosting us tonight, making sure we had good security. Thanks to all who have participated. If you've enjoyed what you've seen tonight and heard and the things that we've learned, the Platform Republicans PAC, we have a Facebook page where we engage in some pretty good discussions about Utah issues. We don't get into federal issues or a whole lot of real local issues, but mostly statewide issues. We have a website where we put up our endorsements and other things like that, and where you can make donations. We have some monthly donors. We encourage people to donate to the PAC. Or with the election season coming up in 2026, if you're interested in running for something, or you know someone who is, we'd like to talk to candidates. We vet candidates and we endorse the best ones, the one that best reflect our platform Republican agenda. And so those are some things that we'd love to have more people be involved with. Our PAC's been going since 2020, and we've successfully helped a number of candidates to the House and the Senate. I think next year we'll mostly be focusing on open seats, and we definitely, as has been expressed in the comments, would like to see some improvements in the Senate. And so it's always tough, but those who want to help us bring a more conservative view to the Senate, we'd love to talk. So with that, check us out, Facebook, Platform Republicans PAC. Online, it's platformrepublican.com. And we also have options for donating and getting involved. So thanks, everyone. We're going to shut it down now. Good night.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, guys. Appreciated
Night.
it.
Go ahead, leave chat. What is that? I don't know. You can, okay, take a video.